Hi, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed this Game Industry Insight, a look behind the scenes at game development. And be sure to subscribe and you can pitch future video topics. Alright, for today's Industry Insight, we're going to be talking about the recent decisions of Sony and Microsoft with what they're planning for this console cycle with the PS4 Pro and the Xbox Scorpio. This is going to be based on today's post over on Game Wisdom, which you can find below. But here's what's going on. Last week, more details have been revealed regarding the Xbox Scorpio. And the Scorpio itself is going to be the updated version of the Xbox One, basically the Microsoft version of the PS4 Pro. And both Sony and Microsoft are doing something very different. They're not advancing or not working on the next console cycle, but instead they're trying to keep this one going with essentially almost like a PC upgrade for their respective platforms. Both the Scorpio and the PS4 are touting 4K TV support, again, better graphics, faster speed, stuff along those lines. But the big thing is the games that are going to be developed should still be compatible with their original versions. At least is what Sony was talking about. And this presents a very interesting conversation I want to have about the whole console cycle market. Now, when we talk about the console cycle, we are referring to, of course, when the next wave of each console iteration comes out. Again, we could basically track this from the days of the NES to the SNES, N64, and so on. Typically, a console cycle lasts maybe like 4 to 6 years, somewhere along that average. But usually the previous iteration will be in the market longer. I believe the NES came out... I'm sorry, not the NES came out. I believe it actually lasted till about 95, 96. Maybe a little bit later than that, but I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. But the point is, a new console is a very, very big deal. One of these days, we're going to have an industry insight about the mid-90s and the Wild West insanity therein of the console market. But when it comes to designing a console, this is not an easy task. And unfortunately, unless you've worked at one of the major platforms or platform companies and been specifically part of that division, the ins and outs of console development is going to be something that's way beyond my general expertise and probably most of you watching this. But there are a few things we can infer. Making a console, like we said, is not an easy task. You're essentially locking in your hardware and your market for the foreseeable future. Again, you can't expect a consumer to go to the store, buy a new processor for your PlayStation 4, and then let them open it up and install it. This is one of the big console versus PC debates, as we know that PCs are very modular, and I'm sure most of you watching this right now probably have your own custom-made or custom-built PC. But when it comes to the console side, once you've locked in what you want for that hardware or that console cycle, that's it. The chips will fall where they lie, and your company's future will be at stake. This is why not too many companies have released consoles. It's a ton of investment, a lot of money, and if you fail, you're pretty much screwed, essentially. And when it comes to this, a successful or an unsuccessful console leads back into that concept of a positive or negative feedback loop. The idea is the more popular your console is, the more people will want to make games for it, which raises its value, which means more people will buy it, which attracts more developers. Conversely, the opposite can happen if the console stinks, or is failing to capture the market. And as we've talked about, Nintendo has been failing in this regard when it comes to courting third-party developers. We talked about this a long time ago when it comes to peripheral designs, but the idea is, why should you dedicate your time, energy, and resources to a market of, let's say, 200,000 people, when you could dedicate it to a platform that has 3-4 million consumers on it? Again, it's a no-brainer. But this is the point about the console side of things. The investment that goes into it means that most likely you're not going to get a 100% return on investment on the platform alone. We've seen cases where Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony have sold their respective platforms at a loss. The idea is to create a consumer base or a market base for it, because they want to have several million easily of consumers with their consoles, because that courts developers. And then the company will make money on the royalty rates of getting these games on their platform. And when that works, you essentially have a license to print money. When we talked about Nintendo during the late 80s, early 90s, that was a big part of it. Nintendo not only earned money on selling the cartridges to developers, but the royalty rates on the games sold, and they of course had complete control. And at this point, as long as your console is popular, you can just basically sit back and let people make games for it. And because of that, this has always led into that arms race of new consoles, the new hotness, of trying to compete with one another. This is what led to Sega basically getting kicked out of the console market in, I think it was 2000 or 2001. I don't remember that off the top of my head. But the point was, when the Dreamcast was released in 1999, for about a year, it was considered the most technologically advanced console on the market. Again, being the hot new hardware. But when the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox came around, and Sega Dreamcast was no longer the top part, basically they lost their market. Again, why would you develop for the Dreamcast when you had Sony with games like Metal Gear, Devil May Cry, Silent Hill, and the like? And of course, Microsoft had their killer app with Halo. And Halo's contribution cannot be understated. And if we haven't talked about that in an earlier Critical Thought Industry Insight, we gotta do that at some point. But what happened, of course, was without having control of the market, the Dreamcast just could not keep going. And Sega just could not have, or they didn't have the first and second party support that Nintendo had. And Nintendo's first and second party support has been a key part of them staying alive in the console market. But again, that's a topic for another day. But with all that said, let's get back to what this means for today. As we've said, when it comes to developing a new hardware cycle, this is a very big investment, and it's a lot of risk on the platform manufacturer. Because you're essentially saying, your whole market that did really well over here, that's gone. We're not working on that anymore. And it's the same thing we see with a lot of hardware. When the new iteration comes out, the old one gets tossed aside. And that discussion about game preservation, again, that's easily another 10-15 minutes. And I think this is what's led to this decision behind Sony and Microsoft going with a revision instead of a brand new console. They're essentially trying to prolong this console cycle. We've been talking about for a while now that there is a limit of just how much technology you can put into a console and still have it be pronounced. For instance, when we look at the jump from PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3 or Xbox to Xbox 360, that was a pretty big leap. Same for the SNES, the N64, N64 to GameCube, and the like. But this last generation, we're not seeing that massive increase. For instance, if you look at a end of the market like PlayStation 3 title to PlayStation 4, they both are very powerful, they both look really great. But it's not that huge of a leap. And this is what's led to a lot of people, or led to a lot of discussions about at what point is it still fruitful to keep changing the hardware? Because again, whenever we change hardware, this has a massive impact on game preservation and backwards compatibility. When Sony changed their processing technology or the architecture from, I want to say PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4, they basically said they could no longer keep maintaining the PlayStation 2 backwards compatibility. And again, with each new iteration, it pushes the old one further and further behind. So with the revisions that Sony and Microsoft are doing, it's going to present a very interesting case. Because again, you're technically not going to be required to buy a Scorpio or a PS4, at least from what we've been hearing so far. Instead, this is going to be, again, for the luxury items, for the people who own 4K TVs, which I will certainly not be one of those anytime soon. But the point is, the market is not being changed. And I want to get your thoughts on that for those of you watching. What do you think about this going forward in terms of the PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 4 Pro and the Scorpio? Are you in the market for an update rather than a brand new console? And the other point that I want to touch on before we wrap up for today is what this means for Nintendo. Nintendo, as we've said, has certainly had trouble positioning themselves in the market. I talked about this a few weeks ago with Nintendo should be aiming to be number 2. Let Microsoft and Sony try to vie for number 1, and then have Nintendo be positioned as the unique platform you want to get for games you won't get anywhere else. But with the Nintendo Switch, this is Nintendo's first time in a very long while that they are the only brand new console on the market, and the only brand new console for the foreseeable future. Again, we don't know how long Sony and Microsoft will keep up with this idea. So I think this could be the best time for Nintendo to once again try to position themselves as saying, well, you already have a PlayStation 4 or Xbox One. If you don't want to upgrade but you still want new games, look at us. But it is still very early and the ramifications for this can't be fully seen yet. But I want to ask you folks one more question. Do you think this is the right way to go? Instead of having, a PlayStation 5, 6, 7, whatever, we just see updates. The PlayStation 4 Pro, the PlayStation 4 Pro Alpha, the PlayStation Pro Plus Ollie non-360 manual. You can keep going there. But this also raises another point. How long can this go on for? As we've said, with the PlayStation 4 to Pro and the 1 to the Scorpio, they're still going to keep that compatibility. But if we're on, iteration 3, 4, 5, anything like that, can they still promise that? Or are we going to run into those very weird cases where this game will only work on versions 2, 5, and 6, but not 3 and 1? But then if you want to buy this game, it won't work on number 5, but will work on 3. And again, I'm kind of worried that this will confuse the market or make it just this big mass of console versions and whatnot. Kind of what we were starting to see with the whole Steam... nuts. I cannot remember off the top of my head what it was called. The Steam, the actual Steam console that Valve put out, and there's talks about having different versions of it. Not Steam, the Steam Machine, there we go. And how they were trying to position it as being like different versions based on different markets. So you had the cheaper family model, and then you had the expensive hardcore gamer version over here. But again, that just raises questions of how can you support different models with different hardwares in them? Again, I don't have the answer for it. But let's wrap things up here for today's Industry Insight. Again, this could be a major step in a different direction for the console market, and could bring things again closer to bridging that gap between console and PC. Microsoft in particular has been beginning to tout connections between the Xbox One, the Microsoft Store, and stuff along those lines. Could we see kind of like a second coming of games for Windows Live? Oh boy, I just got a chill down my spine when I said that. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and thanks for watching today's Industry Insight. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're new, and if you have an idea for a future topic for me to cover, let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, be sure to check back daily for more great discussions on game design here and on GameWisdom.com, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends, it always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.